All right. Good morning, PT on Ice Daily Show. Let's see who's alive and awake out there this morning after a New Year's Eve. In my defense, I was losing my voice before last night, so this isn't related to last night. So hopefully you guys had a good, safe evening. Alan here, COO of ICE. We're going to talk about some clinical tips today to improve ankle plantar flexion on this New Year's Day. Had some questions last week. So last week on Tuesday, we talked about tips to improve ankle dorsiflexion on Christmas. So if you haven't watched that one, go back and check that one out. A couple of you had questions about how to, morning Kelsey, morning Dan, how to improve ankle plantar flexion, right? A couple of you had comments, hey, we rap on dorsiflexion a lot in the clinic, but not really on plantar flexion. Most people seem to do okay with plantar flexion, or we just don't care as much about it. So what are some tips and tricks for plantar flexion? And so I answered a couple of you, but I figured just kind of continue this ankle series and just show you what I use in the clinic for plantar flexion. Our very own faculty member Sarah reached out to me as well and asked, said, great job on the dorsiflexion video. I said, thank you. I'm going to work on a plantar flexion video too. And in her experience as a dancer and also as a CrossFit coach, she offered me some tips as well, particularly with the foot and toes. So incorporate a little bit of what Sarah shared with me as well, in addition to some stuff at the ankle. So let's get started. A lot of this is going to seem familiar. Excuse me. It's just going to be in reverse, right? So a lot of the mobs, a lot of the exercises and stretches are just going to be in reverse, but I want to show you them. I don't want to assume anybody doesn't know them. And then I want to show you some progressions that I use that some of you may not be familiar with, right? So hopefully you guys can see and hear. Good. So we got this plate here. We got a whole bunch of stuff here. But the first concept is just like with isometric and eccentric calf raises with dorsiflexion, we want to reverse that. We want to work toe raises, right? We want to fatigue that tib anterior, get some more plantar flexion range of motion. We also want to work that full range of motion of closed chain plantar flexion by elevating the heel so the toes, the toe box, can move through a fuller range of motion than we're used to, right? So very similar to the dorsiflexion drill. We're just going to start. Obviously, the most basic is just going to be, sorry, I'm going to have to close your comment so I can see my feet. Sorry, guys. Obviously, just a toe raise drill, right? If standing is even too difficult to show a good range of motion, we can go down to sitting, but just trying to work toe raising with isometric holds or even a slow eccentric. And most people will progress past that pretty quickly, right? That's pretty simple. So just like with the dorsiflexion, add in a little lift for the heel and increase that range of motion, make it more difficult, work through a fuller range of motion. So now I can drop my toes down, sorry, a little bit more, and then back up, and then control that down through a more fuller range of motion. And just like with the dorsiflexion drills, we're going to do isometrics initially for pain, right? And then we're going to progress to slow eccentrics, fatigue that tib anterior, strengthen it as well, and get some more plantar flexion. So you can go as high as you want. That's just a 10-pound plate. You can go to the 12-inch box like we did last week with the heel raises. Certainly you can go higher than that. But just from the floor and then from a 10-pound plate is a good place to get started. If you've never played with your heels elevated on that and moving your toes through a full range of motion through closed chain plantar flexion, try that. It gets difficult. Front of your shins start to burn pretty darn bad pretty quickly. It's kind of surprising how weak you can be there. So that's toe raises for plantar flexion. The next is we're going to show opposite banded mobilization. So last week, the band was across the anterior part of the ankle, pulling posterior, and then moving into closed chain dorsiflexion. We're going to reverse it, and I'm going to have my foot up on a plate. It's just going to make it easier. You'll see this mob done sometimes with the band around the ankle, and the person is laying really weird and trying to lay back, and it's just awkward trying to get your other foot underneath yourself as well. So I like to do this in standing. So the band is going to pull posterior to anterior behind the ankle. Same concept as last week. Don't actively fire that calf, right? You offload with your other leg and sink into that mob. So here's what it looks like. So I'm right behind the ankle. Some good tension on there. And now I'm going to just use my other leg Just sit back into some closed chain plantar flexion. Let that band do the work of molding my ankle. And again, I'm not actively contracting my calf muscle here. I'm trying to keep that tendon as flat and inactive as possible so that the band doesn't move at all around my ankle. You'll start to hear some gnarly clicks and pops as you reach some ranges of plantar flexion that you're not normally accustomed to. So that's a really nice, safe one. Closed chain, great for folks post-op as well. Not doing anything explosive or plyometric by any stretch of the imagination. So that's a banded mob for plantar flexion. Next, we're going to show the kind of static plantar flexion stretch that some of you may be familiar with. So the one where you kind of lean back on your own foot and stretch plantar flexion. So I'll show the basic one that most of you are probably familiar with, but then I want to show a couple progressions that can make this stretch a little bit more gnarly. Flip around. Yeah. So you guys are probably all familiar with this one, where you get into closed chain plantar flexion back here as much as you can, and then you just sit back, try to sit back on your own heel, and stretch into some more plantar flexion here as much as you can. We get a nice quad stretch here too as a side effect. For me, I don't really feel anything here. For most folks with kind of normalish range of motion, they'll just feel a quad stretch here, right? So we can start to progress this. I've got an ab mat. You can use a 10-pound plate too. But now, throw those toes up on that ab mat, and again, now we're going to increase the range of motion that we can work through. So now, as I sit in, that ankle has more room to go towards the floor, and there's a nice stretch. So just like with the ankle stretches last week, you know, passive stretching, if you want to see tissue creep, it's got to be longer duration, 3, 5, 7 minutes at a time, right? For those of you who do ROM WOD or mobility WOD or something, you know, you sit for positions in a long period of time to induce some tissue creep. So this is a great progression from just the floor. Now we can, if that's no longer a good stretch for your patient or client, we can ditch the ab mat. We can get really twisted with the foam roller, right? I love this one. Now, my toes are really elevated. And now when I sink in, bam, right there. Stretch, and I've got a lot of room to go still. Almost too much stretch here. I have a lot of room to go here, and I'm still feeling a pretty darn good stretch, right? So I'm feeling that now way up the front of the leg. Feeling it even back into the tendon. I'm getting such a stretch around my foot, but that's because my calves are tight. So that's a really gnarly progression for that one that I like. For those folks who aren't challenged by the floor or just a little ab mat, put those toes up on a foam roller. You can get even more gross with this and put it up on a small step or box, right? If you really need to feel a good stretch to really get that in-range plantar flexion back, right? Really important we get plantar flexion back for folks like dancers who need absolute full range of motion for plantar flexion. Even athletes, right? Explosive athletes, they need that toe off. They need that full plantar flexion range of motion. And you know, in my realm, CrossFitters, weightlifters need that triple extension during lifting, so we need as much plantar flexion as we can. So play with those progressions and get as much of that plantar flexion range of motion back as possible. So let's move on real quick to, let's check the comments here quick. Good. So let's look at a couple things on the toes, right? So Sarah shared with me some intrinsic foot strengthening stuff that some of you may be familiar with. And then we'll talk about a little mob at the foot as well, and then a couple drills just to make your heel raises. So not only improving plantar flexion range of motion, but plantar flexion strength as well. So a couple little tricks to improve that. So hopefully you can see my feet here. I apologize. They're not the best looking feet in the world. Maybe I'll do this. Yeah, okay, here we go, perfect. So a lot of you may be familiar with toe yoga, but I never underestimate the fact that people can't do some of this stuff in the clinic, right? So the first is just, can they isolate great toe extension from the other feet, right? Can they lift that great toe up, activate that tendon on their own, right? Is it stiff? Is it weak? We need to figure out why. sometimes in the clinic, you'll ask people to do this, and you say, just lift your great toe, right? And their foot does this. It does absolutely nothing, right? They don't have the control, they don't have the strength, they don't have the motion to do that. And then we ask them to flip it. Sarah calls these, I think she calls these shortsies or toesies. So plant that big toe, and now can you lift your other toe without that big toe moving, right? And same thing, you'll ask people to do this in a clinic, and the foot just looks like this. They can't control it, they don't have the strength, they don't have the motion. And then we just want to see that spreading. You see, I struggle with that a bit, especially in toes 2 and 3. They don't really go anywhere. But working on toe spreading as well, some intrinsic foot strengthening. You guys all know short foot, right? So without curling the toe, just pulling the big toe towards the heel, working on that medial arch, which is working that posterior tibialis as well. Plantar flexion strength isn't just calves, right? We have to work the other muscles of the back side of the leg as well for full foot strength, especially if we are getting athletes back to doing what they do, right? So that's short foot. The other thing is, we'll talk about calf raises. Sorry, standing on one leg. So often, when we ask people to do a heel raise, like, we ideally want them to show us fully straight, right? Sometimes what you'll see, Sarah calls this kipping heel raises, and I like it, right? You'll see people pop their hips, right? And it looks like they're doing some pretty darn good heel raises, but they're just doing triple extension, right? They're using their hips, their core to get those heel raises. They could do this all day long because they're not really using their calf muscles. So make sure that we slow them down. They get up nice and slow and controlled, right? And that'll really assess that plantar flexion strength. We'll sometimes see too that folks, when you ask them to do a heel raise, they come out, right? They start to come up into plantar flexion, but then they come out. And they're getting some close chain supination there because they have some medial weakness, right? So they're getting, or range of motion restriction at the great toe. So they're coming away from that great toe onto the outside of their foot to show you a heel raise. And a really great way to avoid that, I've got this little mobility peanut thing, right? This is from Mobility Wad, but you can find this at any sporting goods store, right? Sarah shared this with me, and it's great. So plant that right above the malleolus and have them hold against it, right? And so now they can't supinate for you, right? They can either show you the maximum amount of true plantar flexion range of motion they have, or they can show you a good one, right? Because now we're not allowing for that supination. If they supinate here, the peanut drops, right? So that's a great cue, great feedback to avoid that close chain supination so that you can get true calf raises if you're working calf strength, right? So great cue here from Sarah with the peanut. And then the last thing we'll talk about is just working on first toe extension here. So down here at the met head, right, some people can be stiff. Certainly I don't have the range of motion I'm supposed to have. So we can mob this for them in the clinic, but we can also show them here just by grabbing, let me grab the tripod here. You need both hands for this. All right, and we're back. Sorry. Hit a button. All right. Okay, and we're back. So, have them stabilize the other 4 toes of their foot, right? And we can teach them to give themselves a self-mob here, right? Just anterior, down on that met head. Also, they can give themselves some traction here, right? Just mobilizing that met head a bit more. If you think that their problem is great toe range of motion and not strength, right? So a self-mob here can be really helpful, especially for those folks who need to get back to perfect triple extension, our dancers, our folks who are weightlifting, doing CrossFit, that sort of thing, folks who need to be truly up on their toes with full range of motion at this joint. If you think it's a range of motion restriction, you can do it in the clinic. You can also show them how to do that one at home. So that's a great one to do at home. So, apologize for being late, but there's a bunch of great tips to help improve ankle plantar flexion, right? So we talked about the toe raises through a greater range of motion using plates and boxes to train a fuller range of motion with eccentrics for strength and motion. We talked about a posterior band immobilization on a plate to get some more plantar flexion. We talked about the traditional kneeling plantar flexion stretch and how to progress that with a pillow, with an ab mat, with a foam roller, with a box to really open up that stretch a lot more and then do some tissue creep there. And then we talked about some toe yoga stuff, great toe raises, toe spreading, short foot, heel strengthening. And then we just talked about using the peanut to prevent supination during closed chain plantar flexion so that we're truly strengthening the plantar flexors, and then also a little mobilization for the great toe to improve great toe extension, to help with triple extension, those dancers trying to get up on point, that sort of thing. So I hope that helps. If you guys have anything else for plantar flexion, go ahead and throw it up on here. We'd love to see it. Again, this is something that a lot of people don't know as much about as we talk often more about restoring dorsiflexion than plantar flexion. So that's it. Hope you guys have a good New Year's Day. Hopefully you're not feeling too rough. Again, like I said, I swear I was losing my voice before last night. This has nothing to do with last night. It's completely sober last night. So hope you guys had a great night last night. Hopefully you get a little recovery in today, get a little sweat on somehow, start the new year right. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.